I tried turning Stranger Things into an anime in 7 days, and halfway through I started questioning if I could even upload this video. You see, I've animated a lot of anime style stuff in the past, but live action is way harder to translate. Hell, it took me 3 months to animate a single Breaking Bad scene, so attempting Stranger Things in 7 days was already a really bad idea. Then I made it worse. Instead of me simply picking a safe, easy scene to animate, I let you guys and the luck of the draw decide my fate. I wrote down your favorite Stranger Things scenes on this wheel, and whatever it lands on, I have to animate all by myself in just 1 week.
A lot of you want to see the Will Sorcerer scene. God, that one's pretty hard. I have to write it twice because I got so many requests on that. Here we go. Please don't be a hard scene.
The moment the wheel stopped, I knew I was cooked. And that's because this kind of scene is a nightmare to animate for 2 very big reasons. First of all, this scene alone has 23 cuts, which is the most I've ever animated in a single video on this channel. And I gotta do it in 7 days. And second, this isn't just some random filler moment in the show. This is an incredibly important scene. This is when the main character finally awakens his power after 5 seasons. So if even one part of this looks off, people are gonna notice immediately. Now let me put this into perspective for you. If I wanted to leave just 1 day for compositing and putting everything together, that would mean I had to fully complete about 4 cuts every single day. But I don't mean just animating them. I mean sketch, cleanup, in-betweens, coloring, all completely done. So if I fall behind even once, the entire plan would collapse. Coming into day 1, I had one question on my mind. How do I make this scene look good in just 7 days? Because if I tried to animate this the way I normally do, there was just no chance I would finish this on time. So the first decision I made was to simplify the character designs, which basically meant a lot less shading and relying much more on compositing later on to add depth and detail. At the time, this felt like a smart compromise. I wasn't giving up on the quality of the animation, I was just postponing it. That part was a little scary because it meant the drawings themselves were gonna look less impressive on their own. But if this was gonna work at all, that trade-off felt necessary. However, I didn't want to commit to the style blindly. So instead of starting at the beginning of the scene, I picked a cut somewhere in the middle, a cut that was simple enough to test the idea quickly. Because if this didn't work, I wanted to know as soon as possible. The first real problem I ran into was the Demogorgon. It's an insanely detailed character, and there was no way I could afford to animate it all at its full complexity. So I made a pretty risky call and just removed the teeth. At first, I wasn't sure if that was gonna look good at all, but I kept reminding myself that things usually look bad before they start looking good, or something like that. To bring some of that lost detail back, I used a custom texture brush on the skin, inspired by the Titan skin texture from Attack on Titan, which sort of gets the job done. Once I drew up a quick background and composited the shot together, I finally got to see my vision come to life. And honestly, even though I was pretty nervous at first, this style just might actually work. The drawings themselves weren't anywhere near as detailed as what I would normally do, but the overall shot still felt high budget. And what really sealed the deal is that this didn't take that long to make. That gave me enough confidence to move on. Next, I animated this scene which features Will, using a 3D model for perspective and tracing over it. My biggest fear here was that he wouldn't really look like Will, but I didn't have the luxury to slow down or overthink it. So I just committed and kept on going. And surprisingly, this shot was a lot easier than I expected. Still time consuming, but wasn't very mentally draining. By the end of the day, I managed to finish 2 more shots. One of Mike looking up, in which the face was looking pretty rough, honestly, and another one of Lucas on the ground shaking in fear as the Demogorgon is about to strike. They weren't perfect at all, not by any measures, but they were done. When I looked back on the day, I came to realize that it was an incredible start to this challenge. I got all 4 shots done, and most importantly, I validated my theory. I actually felt like I could do this. And then day 2 came. Coming into it, I realized something pretty quickly. If I tried to do all of these backgrounds in 2D, there was just no way in hell I had a chance of finishing on time. With the incredible amount of cuts I still had to animate, that workload was straight up impossible. So I made a decision I really didn't want to make. I decided to build the main scene's background in 3D using Blender. This way, I could continue to reuse the same background but in different angles. And that choice came with a lot of struggles of its own. You see, I've struggled with CG backgrounds in the past. In fact, I haven't really used them in my animations in a long time, especially after finding out just how shit I am at making them when I tried working like a MAPPA animator back in that 72-hour video. But if I wanted any chance of finishing this project in time, I really didn't have any other option. I needed to make this work. At first, I tried creating my own assets, and that lasted not very long. As I watched the clock keep ticking, it became obvious to me that this was just burning time. So I swallowed my pride and started downloading free assets instead. Not very ideal, but yet again necessary. To push the look a bit further, I even went back to an old trick and used real fire videos and scattered them around the CG scene, something I hadn't done since my dog Ningen animation years ago. Then I started layering animated effects, lights flickering, smoke moving in the air, anything to make the scene feel alive. And after all that, I actually ended up with a pretty solid Blender scene. And hopefully it'll do exactly what I needed to do. At that point, I got a bit curious. I wanted to see how one of the cuts would look fully polished. So I took the 5th cut I had animated in day 1 and did the compositing all the way. And honestly, it looked really good. I got genuinely excited for a second, but I didn't realize just how much time I was spending playing around and rewatching and admiring the work I had done. By the time I snapped out of it, most of the day was already gone and I hadn't animated a single cut. So with that realization, I rushed to animate cut 23, which is the cut the animation would close on. It followed a similar setup to cut 5 with a 3D camera movement, but with Will wiping the blood from his nose. Then I moved on to cut 3, which features a pretty big cinematic pan. I animated the Demogorgon twitching and used a still frame of Will placed into the Blender environment and moving the camera instead of redrawing the character. And it worked, but not without its headaches. Getting the camera movement to be exactly accurate took far too many attempts. And by the end of the day, I had only finished 2 cuts, half of what I needed to get done for the day. And even though I knew I had spent a lot of time building the background and these shots had a lot of frames, especially that last one, that didn't really matter because I was still behind. And with this much left to do and this little time remaining, this challenge is beginning to feel real now. After yesterday, I needed a reset. And due to the events of day 2, going into day 3, the goal was simple, and it was just to catch up, or at the very least, stop the bleeding. So instead of jumping into the hardest shots, I decided to focus on all of the reaction shots. They're far simpler with way less movement. And right now, that's what I need. Momentum. Most of the frustration today wasn't the animation itself, it was the faces. Getting the characters to look recognizable without overworking them was pretty hard. But at this point, they didn't need to be perfect. They just needed to feel like the right character. And instead of doing full body reaction animations, I started using shortcuts wherever I could. For shock reactions, I just animate the eyes opening wide, then settling back, looping it instead of animating the entire body. This sold the emotion without costing me a bunch of hours. I kept on using the 3D models to lock in posing and camera angles, skipping the sketching phase almost entirely in some of the scenes. For things like hair and clothes moving in the wind, I used simple loops, nothing fancy, just enough motion to get the job done. Not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4. I finished 5 whole cuts, which was massive, especially after barely getting anything done yesterday. I now felt like I had a little bit of momentum and some breathing room once more. But even with that, there was this weird anticipation anxiety sitting in the background. That feeling of knowing there's still a lot left to do, which features some cuts that look kind of annoying to animate. A sensation of almost not wanting to continue because you know what's coming next. But the momentum I gathered today was strong enough to keep me going. Then came day 4, which is just another day of work. I kept pushing through more shots and some of them were actually pretty interesting to animate, especially this Demogorgon attack. This one honestly took a lot out of me, not because it was insanely difficult to animate or anything, but because it kept getting stuck in the details a little more than I should have. I was just overthinking. I also had this close-up shot of Mike's eyes. In the original show, it's more of a subtle smile after witnessing Will's powers, but translating that directly into the anime didn't really work the way I wanted it to, so instead I changed the shot completely. Also, it was already similar to something I had done earlier, so I went for a tight close-up on his eyes, which amplifies the emotion of the shot. By the end of the day, I managed to finish 4 more cuts, which meant that I technically was still on pace. But it wasn't easy. I genuinely had to push myself to get there, and even then, I was still technically 1 cut behind overall because of what I missed back in day 2. By the time day 5 started, I could feel a strong sense of resistance that had been building up for a few days now, but today, it was impossible to ignore. The shots I was working on weren't even complicated. They feature very little movement, very basic animation, and somehow, even that felt hopeless. I remember sitting there with a tablet in front of me and genuinely struggling to pick up the pen and draw another frame. Not because I didn't know what to do, but because I just didn't have anything left in the tank. I didn't want to do just nothing though. So instead of animating, I told myself I would be at least a little bit productive. I managed to finish the rest of the drawn backgrounds and gathered more of the CG moving backgrounds. These are things that technically still needed to get done, but even while doing that, it felt half-assed. It was like I was moving forward, but not really progressing. By the end of the day, I had only finished 3 cuts, which still keeps me behind schedule, and 2 of them were just Demogorgons getting destroyed by Will's power, which featured really simple animation. At this point, I wasn't even trying to make things amazing anymore. I was just hoping compositing could save whatever bullshit I was making, and then reality really hit me. Tomorrow, I still had had 5 cuts left to animate, and they weren't exactly easy ones either. They were the annoying shots I'd been avoiding on purpose. I really didn't want to do them, but I didn't have a choice. I had come way too far to stop here, and there was no way in hell I was gonna upload some complete and utter bullshit. Going into day 6, the resistance remained. It did not magically go away overnight, but today was quite different because I didn't really have a choice anymore. Everything that was left had to get done today. Most of the shots I worked on were the ones I had been procrastinating on, not because they were impossible or anything, but because they just seemed annoying as fuck in my head. So I started with the Demogorgon shots, ones where they're getting cooked by Will's power. Funny enough, these actually turned out better than what I did on day 5, not because I suddenly felt amazing again, but because I had a little bit more drive today. Then I moved on to 2 crucial Will scenes. These shots are really important for this entire sequence to work, and they needed a lot of in-betweens, way more than I expected. Needless to say, this took forever, frame after frame, just grinding through this. However, that resistance I had been feeling didn't really go away. You see, I still needed to complete just one more cut. That was actually pretty easy, but I just didn't want to. It actually felt like I couldn't. I was damn near disgusted. I tried distracting myself by playing around with the CG backgrounds a little more, trying to tweak things here and there, even though it still needed to be done. This was a form of procrastinating called productive procrastination. I was avoiding the part that was hardest for me at this point. But honestly, that didn't last very long. At some point, I just looked at everything that was still left to do and it felt like a mountain. And instead of forcing myself through it, I made a decision. I was gonna bet on myself and finish everything tomorrow. So by the end of day 6, I still had one last cut left to animate. And on top of that, I had to render most of the backgrounds, do all the compositing, color correction, and audio design in just one day. Technically, I had made it pretty far, but mentally, I had saved the hardest part for last. Day 7 starts and I already felt like I was off balance. I still had one last cut to animate, but before I could even think about that, I had to gather 3D backgrounds for every single shot, one by one. And that process was miserable. Every camera angle needed its own setup, every shot needed its own render, and the rendering alone took forever. Even in the Eevee rendering mode, which is supposed to be a fast, less resource-intensive rendering solution, with the trade-off that it looks worse. At this point, I'm just sitting there watching progress bars thinking, this is taking way too long, and getting more stressed by the second. But if that wasn't enough, After Effects and Blender just started crashing non-stop. Random ass crashes. And they got so bad that I literally could not even record my screen anymore, or else I just couldn't work on the project. So now I'm losing time, I'm losing stability, and I can't even document what's happening. I was losing my damn mind. With about 6 hours left, I hit that moment where everything feels kind of hopeless. There was no realistic way for this animation to be finished the way I originally imagined it. But at the same time, I had come way too far to fail now. This animation, even if it wasn't gonna reach its full potential, still had way too much going for it to give up now. In that moment, I got taken back to 2024 when I worked like a MAPPA animator, and it completely changed how I approached the rest of the day. Because with such a tight deadline, I simply couldn't obsess over everything being as good as it could be. So I focus on what I can do. The flickering lights, the layer styles, the gradients, the atmospheric effects, the rim light, anything that could sell these shots at this point. At this point, compositing wasn't the polish anymore. It was what made the animation. And then I hit cut 21. This shot almost made me want to slam my head on my desk repeatedly. This featured a 3D dynamic camera zoom out with 2D animation, and the tracking on it was damn near impossible. I tried every method I knew until I came to realize there was just no way I was gonna nail this perfectly in time. And this is where it finally clicked. There was no version of this project where everything was gonna be fully polished. Some shots were just gonna stay imperfect, and for the first time during this entire process, I had to make peace with that. Because success at this point was no longer, this looks amazing. Success became, does this feel right to me? So I quickly animated that last shot, and one by one, I locked in every single cut. By the end of all this, I was exhausted, I was stressed, and I was completely out of time. But somehow, I crossed the finish line anyway. Not with a perfect animation, but with something that came together authentically. And at that point, that was more than I could have ever asked for. I felt like I found my style. So here is the final animation. Enjoy. Before I end the video, I want to give a quick thanks to the sponsor that basically held me up for this entire week, FlexiSpot. One thing I really appreciate about FlexiSpot is that they did not want to interrupt the flow of the video, and that's exactly why I chose to put this sponsor mention here at the very end. That's because they respect the viewing experience and trust creators to share their products in a natural way. And honestly, after spending long days working and animating on this desk, I feel very comfortable recommending it to you guys. I was animating on their E7 Pro desk for 8 to 12 hours a day, and honestly, without it, this challenge would have been way harder than it already was. Being able to switch between sitting and standing whenever my body started feeling achy made a huge difference, especially during the longer days. What genuinely surprised me though was the stability of the desk. Even when fully raised, the desk just isn't wobbly. And as you can see, I have 4 monitors and a lot of things on my desk, which is heavy and could stack up quick, but the E7 Pro supports up to 440 pounds, so it could very easily support all of this. If you want to check out the FlexiSpot E7 Pro, they've got sales going on right now, and you can use code YTE730 to get $30 off. And if you're on more of a budget, you can check out their E7, which is great also. I'll be leaving the link in the description. Thank you again, FlexiSpot, for sponsoring this video, and I'll catch you guys next time.